Good morning, everybody, in AP US History. This is Mr. Clemmons here. I'm sorry, I guess you can tell by the deepness of my voice that I've got a sore throat this morning, and hopefully it's not strep. I'm going to try to go to the doctor this afternoon and just make sure of that. Anyway, I want to try to finish out the notes for you guys today. Sorry I'm not going to be here this afternoon, but please review for our reading quiz on Monday on Chapter 23 and the Chapter 21 super quiz, 25 questions for a daily grade on Wednesday, Thursday of next week for everyone. Remember that I said that the chapter 21 had basically two chapters in it, American imperialism and World War I. And so I made a video for you guys about World War I last week, and make sure that you finish up everything with that. And that'll be next week. So let's go through and finish up these notes. For fourth period, sorry, I'm going to have to repeat myself on this, but seventh period hadn't got quite as far as you guys. So the Red Scare, Bolsheviks, the fear of Bolsheviks, this was one of the communist groups within Russia. They're the ones that got power. And so that once they do, they broadcast that they want to bring a worldwide workers' revolution, which makes people nervous in Western Europe and in the United States. And then they murder the Tsar and all their kids and much of the nobility and stuff. And so it appears that with communism comes a violent overthrow and a violent revolution. And so there's a great fear of that, which leads to a Red Scare in America, which also leads to the Palmer raids. In April 1919, 34 mail bombs were sent to government officials. In June, a bomb exploded outside the home of Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer. Palmer established an anti-radicalism division in the Justice Department, the FBI, and named J. Edgar Hoover, a very young J. Edgar Hoover, to direct it. In November, raids of radical organizations began. The raids peaked in January of 1920 with the arrest of 6,000 radicals. However, they found less than 10 weapons and no bomb-making material. The situation abated by the summer, but by the end of it, radicals such as anarchists, communists, and to some extent socialists were superglued together as evil in the United States. This is where those words, as I told you all earlier this year, became dirty words in American history. Sacco and Vanzetti, they get caught up in this in Red Scare in May 1920. Nicola Sacco, a shoemaker, and Bartolome Vanzetti, a fish peddler, were arrested in Massachusetts for the murder of two men during a holdup. These self-proclaimed anarchists were convicted and sentenced to death despite a lack of evidence and clear bias of the prosecutor. The judge was going to fry these guys. He basically said so when he first got in there. He didn't like anarchists, and he was going to punish them basically for being anarchists. He also did not allow the evidence that proved neither of them could have committed this crime in the trial. I mean, and as soon as he passed sentence, he said, let's get in there and carry it out. And man, they took him in the electric chair and fried him. I mean, there was no chance for a long-time appeal or anything like that. It kind of became kind of a cause célèbre during the time of the trial, and a lot of people wrote about it and stuff and all. And a lot of people had seen the evidence that they really hadn't done it. But this guy was violently anti-communist, anti-anarchist, and so on, and the judge was just going to make sure they died. Really using them as an example to say to all immigrants, we know you all are evil and bringing in bad ideas into here, and so we're getting rid of you. Politics in the 1920s. Women in politics. The Shepherdtown Federal Maternity and Infancy Act, which is kind of surprising for that era. Progressive women hoped voting rights would lead to the passage of important legislation in the 20s. This act provided federal money for medical clinics, prenatal education, and visiting nurses. It was the first time Congress gave money directly to the states to administer social welfare, but critics claimed it would create socialized medicine, and it ended in the late 1920s. Equal Rights Amendment, 1923. 1923, Alice Paul of the National Women's Party persuaded congressional allies to consider an Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution, which states men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States. That's all. That's all. Men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States. Opponents rejected on the basis that it would threaten recently won protective legislation for women. Now, y'all, here we are in 2023. In 2023, 100 years later, we still do not have an Equal Rights Amendment for women. And, you know, it's really a basic thing. I mean, we're talking about men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States. You know, it's not an exaggerated thing. It just says women, but we don't have one. It's not legal, okay? The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, International Peace Organization created in 1919. Jane Addams was a founding member. It protested imperialism and negative repercussions of militarism. It was criticized during the Red Scare. Republicans and business. In 1920, Warren G. Harding, an Ohio senator, promised to get back to normalcy. You know, with dollar diplomacy, with moral diplomacy, with big stick diplomacy, Warren G. Harding says, let's get back to normalcy. Okay, ha ha ha. Harding won in a landslide over James Cox, whose running mate, by the way, was FDR, who will win in 1932. He appointed Herbert Hoover as Secretary of Commerce. He died of a heart attack in 1923. While Harding was personally honest, scandals were revealed, including leasing of oil reserves to private companies, the Teapot Dome scandal. Secretary of the Interior Albert B. Fall was the fall guy over this scandal. Harding was an honest guy. He brought a lot of people from his government in Ohio to Washington, D.C. They got the nickname the Ohio Gang, who were on his cabinet as his advisors. But most of these guys were card-playing and drinking buddies of his that he knew from businesses and things like that back in Ohio. And they got to Washington, D.C., and even though Harding was honest, behind his back, they did all kinds of crazy deals and got in a lot of trouble. And after he died, before he died, these scandals weren't discovered, but all these things came out after he died. Now, the biggest one, and the one you have to know, this is always on test, it's always on the AP exam, is Teapot Dome. Standard Oil paid $400,000 personally to Albert B. Fall, the Secretary of the Interior, to get oil leases on a piece of land in Wyoming called Teapot Dome. It's just a mountain feature on top of a mountain on this piece of land where oil was found. That's all. But it was a big deal, and Albert Fall went to jail for that. In Calvin Coolidge, he wanted limited government. He was the vice president, became president. He wanted isolationism and tax cuts for business. He stated the business of America is business. Republicans did not want to continue most progressive measures from the 1910s and did not enforce the antitrust laws. Letter C, dollar diplomacy. In foreign affairs, all three Republican presidents wanted private banks to make loans to foreigners, hoping to stimulate U.S. economy by increasing demand for products, extending Taft's idea of dollar diplomacy. So what we're going to do instead of doing moral diplomacy or big stick diplomacy and actively engage, what we're going to do is we're going to invest in foreign countries, particularly in Latin America, Central and South America, and that way make friends and influence people in that way and encourage people to buy American products. Banks wanted the government to ensure that loans would be paid back even by unstable governments. Banks gave loans with conditions such as oversight by bank commissions and the military force of the United States. The U.S. Marine occupation of Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, and Haiti began as part of forced repayment. Most Americans saw these lands as like possessions. They're not, but we saw them that way at the time. On the defensive, critics denounced loan guarantees and military intervention as dollar diplomacy. African Americans criticized the American involvement in Haiti. WILPF visitors to Haiti in 1926 claimed the U.S. soldiers were exploiting Haitian women. There were calls for isolationism and forced presence to defend these foreign relationships. Then you have the culture wars in the 1920s. Now, y'all, this is between city, the urban, and scientific versus the rural, the country, and the religious. So on the one hand, you have urban, city, and science and modernity. Okay. On the other hand, you have conservatism, the country, and religious conservatism there. Prohibition. Rural and native-born Protestants wanted prohibition, aided by calls that drinking German beer was unpatriotic during World War I. The 18th Amendment passed in 1917 and ratified by 1920. It prohibited manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors. It's one of the worst laws in all of U.S. history due to the increase in crime. Y'all, one of the things that happens out of this particular passage of this bill is that we, at the time in 1919, we did not have a national, connected, organized crime syndicate in America. But 14 years later, when we repeal it, we do. And those people don't go back to being good law-abiding citizens. They provide people with other things that they feel like they need, like illegal drugs and prostitution and all kinds of things like that. And America has not gotten over this. We still have a national crime syndicate today in 2023. It turned out to be one of the worst pieces of legislation ever. And within 7 years of its passage, the Women's Christian Temperance Union realize that, and their president goes to Congress and says, please repeal this. I think it was like 1928, maybe 8 or 9 years after it was passed. They see and realize that it's just created this whole criminal underworld here in America. Evolution in the schools. State and local school boards in some areas wanted to mandate school curricula based on biblical teachings. Y'all remember, evolution of species, natural selection, Charles Darwin's theories, was back in the 1860s, okay? But by now, by the 1920s, in 1900 to 1910, 1920, it's gotten into the textbooks. So some of the southern states that are in the control of Southern Baptists and other conservative Christians in their state legislatures, they want that banned. They want the biblical teaching of creation there. So state and local school boards in some areas want to mandate school curricula based on biblical teachings. Tennessee took the lead by outlawing the teaching of any theory that did not hold biblical teachings central to the existence of humans. The American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, intervened in the case of John Scopes, a high school biology teacher who faced a jail sentence for teaching evolution. The press called the case the Scopes monkey trial. Juries took 8 minutes to find Scopes guilty of teaching evolution. Tennessee Supreme Court later overturned the case. Clarence Darrow was the ACLU lawyer for the defense. William Jennings Bryan, yes, that one that ran for president 3 times, was the lead lawyer for the Constitution. Case seemed as an urban versus rural, science versus religion. Are the similarities today to this kind of clash between religion and faith? Of course there are. Right now we have the things going on over abortion. We have the things going on over teaching of subjects that people don't want to have taught or whatever, so on. We still have that kind of thing. I mean, there was a creation science bill that was passed in my home state of Arkansas in the 1980s and so on and stuff too. So we've had those kinds of debates and arguments since then. The trial ends up being very embarrassing. Clarence Darrow puts William Jennings Bryan on the stand, and he goes through the Bible and talks about all the places where the Bible contradicts itself and really makes William Jennings Bryan look bad. In fact, Bryan dies a broken man about 2 weeks after the trial. But it really showed the divide between modernity and conservatism in America at that time. Nativism. Fears about unrestricted immigration and native-born Protestants who believed them to be the cause of problems in the U.S. Catholics and Jews were targets of hostility. Coolidge said America must be kept American. Arguments that immigrants undermined Christianity and imported anarchism and socialism. The National Origins Act was passed in 1924. They used the 1890 census to determine how many people could enter from individual nations. Immigration was further restricted from Europe in 1929. Immigrants from the Western Hemisphere were unrestricted, leading to increased numbers of Latin American immigrants, including a million Mexicans. The Great Depression led to cuts in immigration from Mexico. Hostility toward Asians grew in California, which passed a law making it illegal for non-citizens to own property. So in the 20s, those nativists that wanted America just for Americans get a law passed in 1921 and 1924, then again in 1929 to restrict immigration from places. Here's what's ironic, though. The people that we were not restricting, we had restrictions on immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe and other places in Europe and so on and stuff and all. But in the 20s, we were recruiting immigrants from Mexico to come. Yes. A country right now where we're building, we've been building a wall on the border with Mexico. And in the 20s, we were inviting Mexican people to come to the United States. So isn't that interesting? The election in 1928, Catholic Governor Al Smith ran against Herbert Hoover, Secretary of Commerce. Opponents, no governor can kiss the papal ring and get within gunshot of the White House. Hoover won a 58% popular vote and 444 electoral votes in a big landslide. But 6 months later, the stock market's going to crash. Okay. Now, I know there's a little bit more notes there and everything, but we're really going to talk about the boom to bust in the 1930s when we talk about the Great Depression in a big kind of way there. So anyway, I want to try to wrap that chapter up for you guys and hope y'all are doing well. And we'll see you next Monday and Tuesday, hopefully. Thanks now. Bye-bye. Don't forget, quiz on chapter 23 on Monday and Tuesday, and super quiz on chapter 21 in Wednesday, Thursday.